Hello everybody and welcome to part 1 in my video series for my knit and crochet combination hat, Sunny hat, which is this guy here. We're going to be starting off with the garter stitch band here today, and I'm going to show you how to cast on with knitting needles and how to create this zigzag section here in this video. So to start off with, I have got my double pointed knitting needles here. These are 4.5mm needles. I'm using double pointed because they're what I have to hand and it's what I like. But if you've got regular 4.5 with the little knobbles on the end, those work just fine as well. So don't worry about that. I've also got some fingering weight 4-ply yarn here that I'm going to work with doubled for the hat band itself. The crochet section is going to be worked single strand, but for now what I've done is I have pulled out the center of my ball and I'm also taking a strand from the outer side of my ball. And I'm going to pull those together to create my yarn. This yarn, for the record, is Dusty Dimple's Dusty Sock yarn in her colorway Foxy, and it is absolutely glorious, as you can see. You'll find a link to this and to the hat itself in the description of the video. Here we go. So what I'm going to do to start off with is to do my cast on. Now my preferred cast on is a long tail cast on, but you can use whichever one you fancy if there's one you prefer. But I'm going to show you here how to do a long tail cast on. So the first thing I need, as you might imagine, is a long tail. Now I'm only casting on 12 stitches, so I'm only going to have about a foot or so of extra yarn. That's more than enough. And I'm going to create my slip knot. You make your slip knot using whichever preferred method you have. That's the only one I can remember. Tighten on your knitting needle. You only need the one needle at the moment. So there we go on that. So to set up for a long tail cast on, what I'm going to do is to have the ball end of my yarn to the north and the tail end of my yarn to the south, like so. And I'm going to have my hand here in the middle. Now the key to this is to keep those two strands separate so that you can remember which one is which. So what I like to do is I like to create a little parakeet, little bird, and I like to put my beak right between those two strands. Then it's simply a question of turning my hand and grabbing both strands with my remaining fingers like so. So I still have my beak, but I have control of both strands under my hand. Then I make my bird squawk and turn my hand so that I can see basically all my fingers like so. So that is beak squawk, turn your hand so you're pointing in a direction like so. So the key to a long tail cast on is to use both of these strands to create a loop. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to take the tip of my needle and I'm going to slide it up my thumb like so, up towards the tip of my finger. Then I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to catch the strand that's on my index finger from behind, just like so. And then I'm going to take the loop that I've made here, this little yarn over, I suppose. I'm going to draw that back through the loop on my thumb, like so. And you can see I've already got a stitch on my needle, but I do have a very loopy knot underneath it. So if I get rid of my thumb and I put tension on the tail end, you'll see the way that's tightening up to create a very well-mannered, very polite stitch there on my needle. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to go up my thumb, around my index finger, and down through my thumb again. Got my loop on my needle, thumb out, add tension, and that creates a nice little knot underneath like so. Absolutely gorgeous. So I'm going to do 12 of these in total. Thumb, index, thumb. Thumb, index, thumb, just like so. One of the things I like the most about this long tail cast on is that it adds a little bit of structure to your cast on stitches from the very beginning. It makes it easier to knit. So while this might seem a little bit fiddly to begin with, it's kind of worth doing because it, oh dear, there we go, up my thumb, index, thumb, there. Because it adds a bit of structure, if you're new to knitting, it does mean that your first row isn't going to be the fight it would be otherwise. You're not going to end up with crazy huge strands of yarn between your stitches like I had when I first learned, or you're not going to end up with super tight stitches because this extra yarn under here will feed a little bit of looseness into these stitches so they won't be squeaking on your needles quite so much when you're beginning. It is, as I say, a little more complex, a cast on, but it is worth it if you can manage it. So we need 12 stitches in total and I have entirely lost count. So let's see what we got here now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh no, I've done one too many. So I'm just going to scooch those up and slide that off. The whole thing will disappear, so you don't have to worry about it. So there we go. We've got our 12 stitches and we still have a healthy amount of tail on our work there, like so. So now I'm going to grab my second knitting needle and I'm going to start working in earnest on this. Now, the pattern itself tells you to slip the first stitch. Now you have an option of either slipping knitwise, which means popping your needle in like so and sliding that off your needle just without doing any knitting whatsoever, or bring your needle to the back of your yarn like so and popping in purlwise, which is this way around here. Now, either way is good, whichever you prefer. I prefer to go knitwise because it gives me a nice bobbly edge on it and it doesn't add a hole to my work. Purlwise will give you a very nice V on the edge of your work, but it does give you a bit of a gap between your stitches like so, which I'm not a fan of. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go in knitwise, then I'm just going to slip my stitch off my hook. Like that's all there is to it. Simple as that. It just makes your edge a little bit neater and a little bit easier to work. So, you know, you haven't done any knitting, but you're one stitch on. Not a bad job. Now I'm loosening up stitch number 2 on purpose because this is actually going to house 2 stitches for me. If you look from the front, you will see that there is a loop on this side and there is a loop on this side as well. And I'm going to put a knit stitch in both. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide in like so to create a knit stitch, yarn over and draw through. Now, usually when I'm knitting, I would slide this off and consider this stitch done. But because we're looking to increase the number of stitches on this row from 12 to 13, I'm going to make this stitch create 2 on my next row along. So I'm not going to slide it off because I'm not done with it yet, but I am going to work into the back loop. Now, if you'll bear with me for a second, I'm going to do this slowly. Might be a little bit obscure, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my needle down through the center of that stitch and pick up the loop at the back. You see it there? And I am going to put a knit stitch in there as well. So I'm going to yarn over, draw back through. And now that I have those 2 stitches in place, that was my slip stitch here. I've got those 2 stitches in place. Now that loop is entirely done. I have gotten all I can get out of it. All the juice has been squeezed out of it. So I'm going to slide that off like so. And now I have basically used 2 loops, but created 3. After this, it's simply a question of knitting the rest of the row, bearing in mind, ladies and gents, that you do have 2 strands per stitch. So if you realize that after one row you've got 24 stitches, it means you have knit into every strand individually and you have managed to increase from 12 to 24 simply by doubling your stitch count. There we go. So I'm going to knit to the end here. And then I'm going to count my stitches just to prove the magic of that knit forward and back. There we go. And the last one there can be a little fiddly. There we go. Okay, so that's our first row, and you can kind of see you've got a little bit of knitting underneath. So hooray if you've gotten this far and you're new to knitting. Here we go. So we have got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 and 13 stitches on there. So that is casting on, knit forward and back, slip stitching and regular knitting. I hope you'll join me in the next video where we'll be doing some decreasing.